Good morning, I'm Simon Spalter, and this morning I've got Huw Philipps with me, an expert on everything about tennis equipment. Welcome, Huw.
Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
All good, thank you. So, Huw, today we're going to talk about rackets and everything we need to think about choosing a racket. So, does it matter if you're a club player, what kind of tennis racket you choose?
Yes, it very much does. There's lots, there's hundreds of different rackets to choose from out there. And when you're actually looking at a racket, you need to sort of try and think about your sort of playing style. There's rackets that are meant for people with very loopy strokes, rackets for people who have very short, compact strokes. There's different string patterns, and all these can sort of affect the enjoyment of the game. If you've got the wrong racket for your game, you're making it harder for yourself to play the game. So choosing the right racket and having it, for the want of a better phrase, fit to your game, it will just bring more enjoyment to playing.
Okay. And do you need to buy one of the best brands, the well-known brands, or if you're sort of just starting out as a club player, how much do you need to spend on a racket? What are the main considerations going to take you at a stage?
There's there are several reputable manufacturers of rackets, and to be honest, if you pick any racket from within their range, you can't go far wrong. They have, just to use three of the main, the larger brands: Head, Wilson, or Babolat. Other brands are available as well: Yonex, Dunlop, and so on. They all have several rackets ranges suited to different styles of play. So, to use Babolat by way of example, they have the Pure Aero range, the Pure Drive range, and the Pure Strike range. The Pure Aero range, which is the one endorsed by Rafa Nadal, that is designed for people who want to look for more spin when they're hitting the ball. The Pure Drive, which is the blue frame in their range, endorsed by Fabio Fognini, used to be the racket of choice for Andy Roddick when he was playing. That's more of a power orientated frame. It gives easy power when you're hitting the ball. And then the Pure Strike, endorsed by Dominic Thiem. Hopefully he'll be back playing properly soon. That's a more control oriented racket. So that's where a player has more, fuller swing and generates more of their own power, and is looking for a racket that can sort of temper the power a little bit and keep the ball in play. So those are three examples. Wilson, Head, Dunlop, Yonex all have similar characteristic frames in their range. So it's the key to trying it is to basically, if you're before you purchase, demo several different options to find which one you're comfortable with, because you may not get on with a Babolat. You might find them too stiff, for example. You might prefer something from the Yonex range in that. So the key is to try them in the same way that if you were playing golf, you'd go to a fitter and you'd try lots of different golf clubs, and then you'd fit the one that best suited you and you found most comfortable.
So I'm going to come back to that in a minute after we've gone through a few questions, because it's interesting in the tennis environment, as opposed to golf, where you would maybe go to a golf pro shop.
Yeah.
It's not so easy always to trial tennis rackets in today's world. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But if you're a lower club player or a club player and deciding whether you want power, control, or spin, I would say most players are going to say, well, we need control because we need to be able to keep the ball in the court.
Yeah.
So again, where does that expertise come from to help that player?
Well, either you can, go to, look at, your, local pro shop, explain your style of play, or, as well as with your club coach, sort of speak to them. They should be able to advise you on the right racket for your style. Again, it's trying, just what I've said there, that there's the different characteristics of different rackets. Again, you might, the key is to sort of trying the frames before you buy them. So actually, you might go in thinking you want a racket for spin and control, but actually, in my previous example, you prefer the pure drive, which is a bit more power orientated, just because you get on better with it when you're hitting the ball. It's all a personal preference thing, and it's key. The key element is just basically trying the different rackets before you commit to buying one, because we've all been there. We've all seen the latest, greatest racket come out, endorsed by Roger Federer or Andre Agassi, going back a bit, and you buy it, and there's that honeymoon period where it's the best thing since sliced bread, and then after a couple of weeks, you settle down and you realize you can't hit your forehand anymore because the racket doesn't suit your game. So it's all about trying those frames out before you commit to spending to get a decent racket anywhere, a decent production racket anywhere above £100 on a frame.
Okay, so with rackets specifically, depending on your age or your physical strength, man or woman, gender,
yeah,
how do you then choose a racket from that perspective? And then let's bring in the additional consideration that some rackets have a heavier head and some have a lighter head. Some within the overall racket, the weight distribution can vary. So again, this is another complexity.
It is again, and so the manufacturers all make rackets in different weights. So again, not trying to babble out or any particular brand here, but they're quite a straightforward example with their pure aero racket, which is the Rafa Nadal endorsed racket. They have pure aero, the regular model, which comes in at 300 grams. Then they have a team model, which is slightly lighter at 285 grams. Essentially the same racket, but a bit lighter. So it's meant for juniors, who aren't necessarily big enough to wield the heavier frame. And that's a characteristic that all adults need to think about as well. Do they want, if they're playing on a Saturday morning, do they necessarily want a really heavy racket, or are they playing competitively where a heavier racket might help them, withstand heavier shots coming at them? Again, it's trying those rackets out, because a lot of customers I see, they immediately go for the lightest racket because they think it's easier to maneuver, and yes, it is. But it may not actually help their game. They might their swing, they might swing too quickly because it's too light. They might need a slightly heavier racket. A lighter racket generally to make them, otherwise, because there's less material, they're less heavy, they make them stiffer generally. So that could have an impact on the arm if you're not careful. So you might find a heavier racket again suits you in that scenario. So again, it's all about trying these different frames and not, crucially, not just picking one off the shelf that you like, like the look of. It's all about trying different frames. And just because you're a massive Rafa Nadal fan, and lots of people are, his frame may not be the best one for your game, just because you like the look of it,
And does a frame or a weight of a frame or the size of the frame matter, or the string pattern, if you're, for example, a serve and volleyer, or somebody who likes to volley, or someone who likes to play lots of doubles? Should you have a lighter frame to volley a lot?
Lighter frames will be easier to maneuver. If you're a serve and volleyer, I mean, the game has evolved quite a lot, with different strings and things. So the old analogies of, back in McEnroe's day and things like that, and the early advent of graphite rackets, a more headlight racket was easier to maneuver, was better for certain volleyers, because you're able to move the racket around quickly at the net, short and sharp. Baseliners would generally favor something heavier in the head, because then they could have more power. It would just allow them to have a more stable racket for rallying and so on.
Yes.
As we've evolved, strings have been probably the biggest change in tennis in equipment in the last 20 years. there's new strings out there, polyesters, things like that, which allow you to take a big swing at the ball, and the polyester will add spin without changing your stroke overly. Whereas in McEnroe's day and you know, in the early 90s, a lot of them favoured natural gut, which was great. But you can't, you know, that's a very powerful string, and you just don't get the control necessarily. You know, you can, but not to the level polyester allows you to just. I mean, Agassi famously quoted when he tried out Luxolon Alupower, which was a well-known polyester. He said basically everybody should be allowed to use this, or they should ban it, because he found he could basically take his usual trademark big cuts at the ball, and the strings would just add that spin, and it would just dip down into the baseline without him having to change anything.
Yes.
So because of that, you know, rackets still come in head heavy, head light, even balance flavors, but it's now more of a, you know, certain volleys can use, you know, you generally find the lines have blurred slightly because,
yes,
you know, but the traditional sense, a more head-light racket is easier to maneuver. So if you were solely certain volleyer, that's probably where you'd want to start looking, and then see if something else, because there's also elements, to go off on a tangent, you could find a more head-heavy racket and have it customized by a technician to change, you know, that you like, and then have the properties of the racket changed. So you might find you've got a racket that's more powerful in the head, more head-heavy, that you can't get on with anything else, but you want it more maneuverable. A good technician could customize it to change those characteristics a little bit, but still keep the same racket.
Okay, so just to follow that up, for those who aren't clear about the technician's customization, that's where a technician would maybe put some weights into the head or into the handle just to change the weight distribution a little bit to very much suit the particular player.
Yes, correct. Tailoring the racket to the player.
Right. Okay. And following on from that, I understand that there is an allowance when rackets are made that they could, if you, for example, have a 285-gram racket, is it a 10% tolerance
it's
or below? So if you buy two rackets at the same time, they could be completely different.
Correct. There is manufacturing tolerances. Generally, it varies a little bit brand by brand, but they're plus or minus 7 grams.
Right.
So if you take that to very extremes, you could buy a Babolat Pure Drive at 300 grams, advertised spec. One of those could be 293, the other one could be 307. That's a very extreme scenario. It's unlikely, you'd be very unlucky if that happened. But that basically could, those two rackets, even though they look identical, would play very differently. So, but that's because they're making hundreds of thousands of frames. These are the tolerances that are allowed.
Is there any way around that?
Again,
identical rackets, what do you do?
So understandably, you bought two rackets from a pro shop, and you bought them because you want the same, you know, backup if you snap a string and so on. So the way around that would be to have a qualified technician match those two rackets for you. So they would basically take out the tolerance, so those two frames would be exactly the same.
Yes.
But that requires, you know, that there are qualifications for that, you know, and so you'd seek out your local qualified technician.
Sure. And finally, Huw, I just want to cover this idea of try before you buy. I alluded to the fact that I think that's becoming harder to do now. So are there steps to solve that problem, that if I wanted to try a Yonex or a Wilson or a Babolat before I wanted to buy, and my coach at my club had potentially terms with one racket manufacturer which would disallow him or her from showing me the full range, the coach therefore isn't necessarily the right place to be going. There are fewer and fewer high street stores now where you can just walk in and maybe try a racket against the wall. So what is the long-term solution that the tennis industry is coming up to allow what you're suggesting?
Well, we offer a demo program. So it can be ordered online, or people, if people are interested, I hold a range myself of about 30 plus different demo rackets. So all the latest frames available. So that could be, accept your point that there's less and less retailers offering it, and yes, absolutely, sometimes coaches can be bound by the brand they're sponsored by, which is understandable. So something like Tennis Point or any other retailers as well have access to all of the brands. You could get in touch and arrange a demo, and have a chat, and we could sort out the demo for you. And equally, it could be strung. Strings are crucial there as well. It could be freshly strung, so at least you're not getting some demo with some dodgy old strings in it. So
great. Thank you very much, Huw, for your advice today, and we look forward to seeing you again with another takeaway of information. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thanks for having me.